Hey, it's hammer time. Today we have a special episode of Hammer Time with the great Congressman Jim Kolbe here at the
Former
German
congressman, but that's all right.
Jim, always a congressman and a model congressman. And I want to first start by saying thank you for giving me my start in Arizona politics as a fellow, you say intern.
You were. That's what everything you learned was working with me. No, not true. I've learned it from you.
One of the major areas that you worked on during your time in Congress was trade. And NAFTA, you were one of the architects of the original North American Free Trade Agreement. And just want to first start by asking, do you think that it was right that we needed to update that agreement?
Yeah, I think the agreement did need to be updated, and it was updated through what was called the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP. All we had to do was enter into that, and all the things we wanted on digital and investment and the other things that we wanted were all included in that, and Canada and Mexico were part of that. So when the new administration came in and we ditched TPP, then we had to go back and start over with Canada and Mexico. So it did need some updating. There's no doubt about it. And I think where we ended up with this new agreement is probably pretty good. It's frankly not that different. 2.0 is not that different from 1.0, but it's there are some improvements in it. There's some things that are not quite so good.
What are some of the improvements? Well,
some of the improvements are the things covering investment and the digital issues that were not included. They weren't an issue back in the early 90s. They were not on the table. They were not relevant at that time. So those things are included there. So I think those are some of the improvements that we've got.
Where does the agreement slide back in your view?
Well, I think the area that we have to be most concerned about is the rules of origin for automobiles and how they're put together. The new rule requires 75%, half of the construction has to be made in one of the three countries, and that in Mexico that it has to be on an average of $16 an hour by the year 2024, I believe it is. That's a very high mark for wages in Mexico at this time, and somewhat unlikely. What I think is unfortunately may happen is that a lot of the shifting of the parts and the assembly will be moved to Asia again, and we will lose some of that here in the United States and in the three countries.
Even with all the trade tensions with China and the
well, it wouldn't be necessarily with China, but in other Asian countries. There could be China. Yes, it's possible, I suppose, depending on how that works out.
So Vietnam or some of those other countries
right.
in that
Malaysia,
region.
Singapore, Korea is huge in this area, and Japan, of course.
Brand new administration in Mexico. I mean, people talk about the election here in the United States and whether it was blue wave or whatever you want to call it, pales in comparison to what happened in Mexico with AMLO and the Morena party. How do you? What are your thoughts on, from the business community standpoint, what's likely to happen under this new administration in Mexico?
Well, I think it's clearly a populist approach to things. We've seen that already in his submitting the issue of whether or not the airport in Mexico City should be completed to a vote of a national vote. For heaven's sakes, people up on the border voting on whether or not we should complete the airport down in Mexico City doesn't make a lot of sense. And now he's announced he's going to do some more of these kinds of national referendums. But the problem is very limited number of people are being asked to participate in these things. And so it's not really truly a referendum, and it's not the way you do public policy, I don't think. But what we're seeing is a kind of a populist approach to things. I think where he said that we're going to continue the energy, the agreements that we have now, but I think you're not going to see more opening of investment by countries outside of Mexico into the energy field, and that will be a real mistake for Mexico. I think that we also want to watch to see whether he's able to really make a difference in terms of security in the country. the corruption's rampant, as we know, despite the democratic changes that have been brought about, and I think they're one of the results, frankly, of NAFTA. Of these democratic changes have taken place. It truly is an open political party system now in Mexico. But despite that, the corruption is rampant at all the levels, from the very top down. And the question, will AMLO be able to do something about that? I'm very doubtful, frankly, that he will. I think he's more, if you look at the people under him, there was no real party. This is not a reform party put together. There are people that come out of the for the most part, the old party that's been around forever. And I think what you're going to see is the same sort of thing that we've had before.
I've heard the term grasshoppers, where people from the different parties they saw the writing on the wall in terms of where the election was going.
Of course. That's in any country, I think, any political system, you're just going to see grasshoppers moving to get into the next place, next administration.
It's happened in the United States as well from time to time. Speaking of the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, so now Congress is going to have to do something, and there's talk about possibly doing something in a lame duck session.
No.
No?
There will be nothing done in the lame duck
Okay.
session. We can forget that one.
Forget that.
They're about to finish that lame duck session. It's going to make it very difficult to get this through, although there have been, President Trump has made some significant concessions on labor issues, like this issue of wages in Mexico, and a couple of things on the environment, but mostly on labor issues. I still think the Democrats are going to have a real problem supporting a new NAFTA. And so it's going to be a real challenge to get it through. It's going to take all the skills, and we haven't seen a lot of those legislative skills yet from this administration. So I'm frankly worried about whether or not we can get it through, and what happens if we don't get it through.
What would happen if we didn't get it through?
Well, what happens if we don't get it through is that it continues in place. The current one continues in place, except that because President Trump has never formally announced that he's canceling NAFTA, but that's what he says he will do if it doesn't get approved. He will cancel NAFTA, and then it's a process of, I think it's 12 to 18 months before we formally withdraw from NAFTA. This is a little bit like the Brexit kind of thing, except in this place we're the big party there. But we withdraw from the thing, and we revert back to tariffs that existed 30 years ago, and it couldn't be. It's the worst possible economic scenario we could think of.
And for a border state, I mean, we look at NAFTA. You know, there are certain years where our trade with Mexico has been the difference between Arizona growing and contracting. I mean, this is one of our pillars.
It's absolutely one of our pillars. I mean, we are huge with the trade with Mexico. Not only the cross the border trade of Mexicans that come to the United States to work and to shop and to play there, and vice versa. So you have that tourism part, but you have the tremendous amount of the maquiladoras, as they call them, the factories, where we're doing these work on both sides of the border, and it tremendously improves the economy in both Sonora and in Arizona. And so, yeah, we will be very much affected if NAFTA were to be canceled altogether.
And Jim, thank you for all your great work while you served in the United States Congress, and the work that you continue to do.
Well, I'll return the compliment. I think you do a great job. You and your team are doing a fantastic job at the Arizona Chamber, and it's been great working with you, and I look forward to continuing that.
Thank you, Jim.